In 2015, as Secretary of State for International Development, I led the UK delegation in developing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the successors to the Millennium Development Goals. The SDGs, as they became known, were ultimately agreed at the United Nations General Assembly. Both sets of development goals have provided a transformational framework for change that has galvanised not only governments, but communities, civil society and businesses around the world. They demonstrate that even when it's the most complex of challenges, with a common understanding and shared objectives, there can be action that drives change on the ground. If the UK is to become a place where everyone has the same chance to get on in life, whoever and wherever they are, we need a similar set of levelling up goals. Goals that are just as galvanising and that again unite policymakers, businesses, communities and civil society to work in partnership for the common good of our country. It's never been more important when we see how COVID-19 has levelled down opportunity in our country. Levelling up Britain is more urgent but harder than before. Through the Social Mobility Pledge, a coalition of businesses and universities focused on driving social mobility, and with civil society and cross-party MPs, we've produced the levelling up goals that can deliver a Britain where everyone finally does have the same chances to get on in life. We believe that these are levelling up goals for our country that transcend party politics, ones that all political parties, businesses and universities and communities can support. And together, we're working to meet these goals and to level up the UK.
The Levelling Up goals are so important to me because they address an absolutely critical and vital area around closing the gap. And the University of York's delighted to be working with Justin Greening on such an important agenda, because together we want to build inclusive and purposeful futures for all. And to be honest, this has never been more important than now. You know, COVID-19 has had such a devastating effect on people's lives. Look at the way that it's highlighted inequalities in education, in health, in business, and for young people. And we know that education does not start and end with schools or universities. It's got to be a lifelong process that individuals carry throughout their careers and beyond. And yet the unfortunate reality is that the process of learning, as COVID-19 has shown us, is only available to some and not all. And that's why I'm so passionate about this agenda in terms of the Levelling Up goals and the Levelling Up programme. Because it's not just the job of universities and educators to make this happen. It's going to require, business and politicians and communities all working together to understand not just the barriers in terms of individuals' life. We also have to kind of work with those barriers in order to allow individuals to reach their full potential, regardless of their race or social background. And this is such an exciting and an innovative initiative because it will make a measurable difference. Because by working together, we are making the Levelling Up agenda not just our business, but everybody's business.
As a former health minister and chair of the Jo Cox Commission on Loneliness, mental health and well-being were one of the defining passions of my time in politics. COVID-19 has made us all look again at physical health and issues like loneliness, whose impacts are real and can be long-lasting. That's why we've included health and well-being as one of our Levelling Up goals. Working to ensure we have healthy communities, supporting those who have experienced loneliness, and improving mental health will be key to our recovery from COVID. Issues such as loneliness can affect any one of us, and the businesses and universities that make up the Purpose Coalition recognise that a focus on health is important not just for their colleagues, for their students, but for all of their wider communities too. If the UK is to recover from COVID-19, we need to work together to close the inequalities that have not only widened but deepened during the pandemic. That is what the Levelling Up goals are all about, bringing together MPs, business, universities and wider society to work on closing the gaps that mean we can see levelling up right across the UK. By working together, we really can deliver on levelling up.
Hello everybody, my name is David Harrison. Together with Justine Greeny, 2 or 3 years ago, we started the Social Mobility Pledge, so I'm a co-founder together with Justine. We have over 500 organisations, that talk to each other. I am part of one of those 500 organisations. Between us, we represent 7 million people, 7 million employees, 7 million students. I think we don't have a responsibility to do anything. People say we have a responsibility to do this. You don't. Yeah, that's up to you. If you want to, you've signed Social Mobility Pledge. We designed that because we knew that most of those organisations were doing most of those things in any case. So you could say it was a bit of a smart move, but we had to start somewhere. Levelling Up goals that we are developing right now back at the pledge, or bring targets and measurements to the discussion around social mobility for the first time, because social mobility is another phrase which is well meant and everybody's involved with it means well, but nobody can really measure it. So we're going to try and measure it. Our view is very, very clear. It needs to happen locally. It needs to happen in businesses. So if you can think of goals which measure this social mobility for your business, and then maybe we can export them into a larger cohort of objectives. But starting simple, start small. What does it mean for you and for your business? Doing as we do, which is interact with 500 world-class organisations representing 7 million people and growing. So thank you for your input. It's gone better than any of us could have ever dreamed about when we set it up, not that long ago.
The COVID-19 pandemic has wreaked havoc on our country. Local businesses have been forced to close, hard-working people have lost their jobs through no fault of their own. For children, the impact on their education has been unfair and has lasted longer than any of us had hoped or expected. And the progress we've made in tackling inequalities across the country has been sent into reverse. For community, the towns and villages that I represent, levelling up is more than just a phrase, and now it's more urgent than ever. COVID-19 has touched the lives of many, making the challenges of levelling up, from the education standards to the digital divide, a reality for us all. Whilst the government has rightly stepped in with an unprecedented support to pay people's wages, support businesses, and protect many jobs as possible, we need a plan to build back communities like Keighley and Ilkley that I represent in West Yorkshire. We need a plan and clear and shared objectives. Only then can we build a transformational plan to recover. And that is why I, alongside the former Education Secretary, Justine Greening, our universities and businesses have produced 14 Levelling Up goals to identify the gaps we need to close to make levelling up a reality for all. 14 clear objectives to unite MPs of all parties, businesses, communities and our civil society to work in partnership for our recovery. These are our objectives. Strong foundations in early years, successful school years, positive destinations post-16, the right advice and experiences, open recruitment, fair career progression, widening access to savings and credit, good health and well-being, extending enterprise, closing the digital divide, infrastructure and opportunity, building home and sustainable communities, harnessing the energy transition, and achieving equality through diversity and inclusion. I got into politics to make our country and my local community a better place. COVID-19 has made levelling up harder, but more urgent than ever before. But by working together, we can level up the UK and deliver the fair recovery that we all want to see.
Hello, I'm Ian Dale, and I'd like to welcome you to the launch of Levelling Up Goals, a framework for making levelling up a reality. Now, there's going to be lots of different events over the next few months. The next one will be next Tuesday. Digital Divide is the subject for next Tuesday. It's going to be hosted by the University of Staffordshire. Now, in a moment, I'm going to be joined by our expert panel, which includes former Cabinet Minister Justine Greening, Conservative MP for Keighley, Robert Moore, Professor Kieran Trehan from the University of York, and Simon Boss, Chief Executive of Shoesmiths, one of Britain's leading law firms. Now, first of all, let me just briefly introduce the subject. Now, levelling up, I think, seems to have replaced localism as the political phrase of the year. But the challenge, I think, is to make sure that, as with localism, those in power don't just mouth platitudes, they actually do something about it. The signs are good in many ways, because I think Boris Johnson has adopted this. It was a subject, I think, of his first speech as Prime Minister. I think it was on the steps of Downing Street. And when you look at what's going on at the moment through the COVID crisis, we look at what's going to happen afterwards. And obviously, COVID has illustrated that inequality affects life chances. As we get into the COVID recovery, it's going to dominate the agenda. So, as I say, over the next 5 months, we're going to be hosting a series of online webinars, and we're going to discuss the agenda for levelling up. Now, businesses and universities working in the Purpose Coalition have come up with 14 goals, which we'll come on to in a bit. We want to talk about those goals over the next hour, the ideas behind them and the challenges they seek to start solving. Now, this initiative has been established from businesses, universities, civil society and MPs. And these goals set out a clear objective for the UK's levelling up challenge in the wake of COVID-19. Now, this is all led by Justine Greening, and the goals use the same framework of the UN SDGs, which Justine helped to shape as International Development Secretary, and apply to the very different levelling up challenges facing the UK. So there's a national and an international side to this as well. Now, the aim is to bring clarity to the levelling up agenda and eventually provide a way to track and monitor progress on levelling up as the UK recovers from the pandemic. Now, the development of the goals was also supported by Seema Kennedy, former Minister in the Department of Health and Social Care and the Home Office, and co-chair of the Jo Cox Loneliness Commission. And the goals are chaired in Parliament by Robbie Moore MP. Well, I'm going to hand over to Justine Greening now for a few introductory words, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panel properly. Justine, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ian, and thanks again for chairing the panel debate today. We're launching the Levelling Up goals because often when people talk about levelling up, we're not exactly clear what we mean, and we need to be. If we're going to be able to achieve something, we need to know what we're talking about. For me, levelling up has always been about everyone having the same chance to get on in life. But what does that mean in practice? What are the things we actually need to change if that's going to become a reality in Britain? And the Levelling Up goals are about breaking down what can be a complicated problem to make sure that we fix the whole system, that we get change in all of the areas we need in order to really make a difference in people's lives. And we know that the things that stop people from having the same chance to get on in life are very varied. For some, it's maybe about the gaps that opened up in opportunity when they were in the education system. For others, it's about not having good advice when you're trying to take those big decisions about what careers next. For some young people, it can be that they want a career in a particular sector, but actually that sector's traditionally not really been as open to people like them as maybe it might be. And again, for others, it's an entirely different challenge. It might be barriers that they've got to overcome in their life to be able to make the most of their potential. It could be that they're trying to do all of this education that they need to do when they're living in an overcrowded home. It might be that they are in a very isolated community and very physically disconnected from opportunity, or as we've seen during COVID, it may be that they desperately need access to technology, but they're on the wrong side of the digital divide. All of these are issues that can really stop people from climbing up a ladder to opportunity. So what we wanted to do through the Social Mobility Pledge and the work that we've been doing over the last 2.5 years with businesses and universities was to break down that challenge in a way that truly could be actionable, and that brought not only policymakers like Robbie Moore, MP in Parliament, who's leading the charge on levelling up goals in Parliament, but also brilliant businesses like the one that Simon Boss of Shoesmiths leads, and also, of course, people within education. Professor Kiran Trehan is a key part of that within the University of York, bringing all of those people together to be able to work collectively on the solutions to deliver levelling up. I believe we can meet the challenges and we can make a real difference, but we're going to do that working in partnership. And I think we can learn from what happened with the Sustainable Development Goals to have a more collective approach on levelling up, and really looking forward to the panel discussion we've got coming up now. But in the meantime, a big thanks to Robbie, Kiran and Simon for being part of the panel with us.
Thank you very much, Justine. Let me give you a little bit more information on the rest of our panel. Obviously, Justine, you know, Secretary of State for Education, Transport and International Development. Professor Kiran Trehan is Pro-Vice Chancellor for Partnerships and Engagement at the University of York and Director of the Centre for Women's Enterprise, Leadership, Economy and Diversity. She's a key contributor to debates on leadership, enterprise development and diversity in business. She's led a number of leadership, enterprise and business support initiatives and extensively published a number of journal articles, policy reports, books and book chapters in the field. Robbie Moore is the Conservative Member of Parliament for Keighley and Ilkley in West Yorkshire. Prior to being elected an MP, Robbie grew up in rural Lincolnshire before being elected to one of the so-called Red Wall seats in 2019. Robbie's a trained chartered surveyor, but don't hold that against him, and ran his own business. Simon Boss is Chief Executive of leading UK law firm Shoesmiths. He's the driving force of the vision to be the UK's leading law firm, former national head of the Shoesmiths real estate division. He's also one of the UK's leading figures on the responsible business purpose agenda. So let's start our discussion by talking about what we mean by levelling up, because levelling down is probably a more famous way of putting things. We've had the levelling up idea in education for a long time, and the whole idea of comprehensive education initially was, I suppose, all geared towards levelling up. Not sure how successful that has been. But how can this phrase become part of the political landscape, political jargon, even more than it is now? Because I still think it's one of those phrases you hear in Westminster, but not maybe much further than that. Robbie, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think you have to ask, how is this impacting a constituent, a resident? How is the levelling up agenda actually going to benefit them? And that's exactly what they're asking me. And I think it's about looking at actually the changing nature of societies, where those gaps have been, and actually bringing in a collaborative format many organisations, many cross sectors together to try and achieve some of those goals of levelling up communities. And I represent Keighley, which for far too long has sat in the shadows really of the big city conurbations like Leeds and Bradford, and it's making sure that those areas are not forgotten about, through the levelling up agenda, by bringing together business, education sectors and the community-led organisations.
Kiran, do you think that there is a terminology issue here? Because if we're trying to sell this not just to people who make policy, but voters as well, how does Mrs. Miggins at 32 Acacia Avenue, Scunthorpe relate to it?
I think that's a great question. I don't think it's the wrong word. I think it's absolutely the right word. I think what we haven't done in the past is actually explain really clearly what levelling up means. So different people put their own interpretations on it. And what's really exciting, about the levelling up goals, it gives people a concrete way of beginning to kind of understand what levelling up means. Because every one of us, regardless of our ethnicity, our gender, our backgrounds, will have experienced some kind of levelling down at some point in our lives. And so the example that you give means that what we can now do in a really concrete way is be clear by what that means. And it means access of opportunities for all. And COVID-19 has shown us the sense of community. You know, this isn't just about doing the right thing socially. There's a really good business case for this. And so I think that would be my response. In the past, it's been a word that's used very liberally. What we've now done is put some evidence behind that and clarity as to what that means.
And Simon, it is important to explain it almost in words of one syllable, isn't it? Because otherwise it becomes a sort of one of these management speak type words, and that really isn't where we want to be. I'm talking about things like stakeholder society and things like that, which politicians come up with over the years. But if you look at it from just a rudimentary point of view, it kind of does what it says on the tin, which I suppose is the main advantage of the phrase.
True. But I think it's also bringing it alive. It can't be a phrase that sort of comes and goes as sometimes these things do. It has to perpetuate and it has to endure, which is why I think you have to break it down into the goals so that you actually can see the constituent parts and begin to relate to them individually. And from a business perspective, businesses can begin to think around which of those goals they lean to, and maybe all of them, or it may be some of them, but actually begin to sort of organize their own thoughts and their own businesses to actually begin to have an impact and begin to make a change. So I think it is about simplification, but through that, actually, turning that into action.
I think judging by your headphone situation, your left ear is crying out to be levelled up to the right ear, Simon. There,
we couldn't afford to. Yeah.
Justine, you're a lawyer, don't? Justine, when you talk about this subject, and I mean, you have, I think, become established as the leading voice of this agenda. When you talk to people, are you conscious that it is something that you've got to really enable them to relate to, otherwise people's eyes tend to glaze over?
Totally. And I think people have heard about governments promising things are going to get better in their backyard for a long time. And I think there's been a genuine desire by governments of all colours to level up Britain. I think the challenge has been that it's very hard to do, and that's because it's complicated. But I think the way you actually manage to get everyone pulling in the same direction on this and to get action on the ground is break that problem down, so that the different people involved in helping to change things understand where they fit in. And as Simon says, recognise in a way that it's not just about government and policy, it's also about what businesses can do, because part of tackling levelling up is about how businesses think about opportunities they have and who they give them to and how they work to develop talent. And it's about how you involve wider communities and civil society and charities. And I think if you can get them all pulling in the same direction, understanding how they relate to one another, then you can really start to make a difference. And one of the things I'd really felt about levelling up is it needs to be inclusive. It's not just for, as Robbie says, it's not just about the cities, it's about the towns. It's not just about the north. It's also about places like London, for example. It's not just about urban areas. It's about rural areas too. It's not just about communities. It's about people in particular communities who often get locked out of opportunity. So yes, it's complicated, but we have to master that by simplifying it in this framework of levelling up goals so that everybody feels they can genuinely be part of fixing it.
Isn't it just another way of saying opportunity, though, which, again, over decades, politicians have used that word? I mean, John Major, I think, was probably the best example of that. You used that, I think, even the Tory manifesto in one of the elections that he was leader of the Conservative Party had that word literally on every page. And I'm going to ask you all now the same question. What does levelling up mean for you? I mean, I would say, I'll start this off. I think that it is all about opportunity. And for me, the way I've always felt that I can contribute to a levelling up agenda is actually to provide some opportunities for people who might not normally get those opportunities. Providing opportunities from people from different backgrounds, particularly in the worlds of politics and the media. Now, that's a very small thing that I can do, but in a sense, everybody can do something, can't they? Simon, let's come to you first.
Yeah, absolutely. It is fundamentally about people. So in a people first culture, we're very focused on fairness and equality. And that's simply good business sense, Ian, for all sorts of reasons. You look at the fight for talent and the creation of that talent. I think we're going to have even tougher times ahead in terms of securing and finding that talent that we want in the future. So actually creating an environment where people can come in, do well, be authentic, and are supporting all of that is really good. It attracts that talent and it retains that talent, but also it creates a sort of a passion, a pride within an organization, because within their communities where their business sits, in our case where our offices sit, actually it's a connection to that, and there's a creation that actually individually as well as an organization, you're making a bit of a difference. You're actually helping move on that agenda. So I think all of these things loop round, but essentially it's about people. And I think that's a really powerful thing, that engagement.
Kieran, let's come to you next. In terms of, I want to know what it means to you personally, but also maybe from an academic point of view, from a university point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I want to build on both something that you and Simon said. I mean, you talked about opportunity, but for me, the Levelling Up agenda is more than about opportunity. So that's what makes this initiative different and distinctive. It isn't just about opportunity, it's about really understanding the barriers. And I think the work that Justine and her team have done to lay the foundations have been absolutely vital. And what do I mean by that? By understanding the barriers, I mean, universities, schools, business, public services, communities, politicians working together. And what we've had in the past is almost a piecemeal approach, everybody wanting to do their bit to make that difference. But what this is a collective effort, to kind of create a movement where we're all moving to that one goal, to that one direction. So that's really central. And so for me, it means understanding the barriers at each stage of an individual's life, but then also ensuring that we work towards achieving an individual's full potential and communities' full potential. So we're moving not simply from the individual, but to the community, because if COVID-19 has shown us anything, it's community action that creates a sustainable change. And so regardless of your race or your social background, you have an opportunity to make that difference. And I absolutely agree with Simon. This is also about people, but let's not forget emotions in this. We often talk about the Levelling Up agenda if it's a rational affair. It's also an emotive affair. And so in the context of universities, I think universities have a really important role to play. We talk, at universities about our civic mission. We talk about universities being there as anchor institutions to serve their communities. And I think at the University of York, we've gone back to our roots and our heritage. The university was set up to create equal opportunities and access to education for all. And so I think it's a sharp reminder for us what the lived experience of that actually means and how you work collectively to kind of make that difference. I think that's why I'm excited about it, because it gives us a framework now to work with government, education, business and communities to address what's been, a really long-running challenge about social mobility and inequality of opportunity. But what this does is create an opportunity around inclusivity for all. And that's what's unique and special for me about it.
Robbie, let's come to you next. What does levelling up mean to you? And particularly, maybe you were one of the MPs elected in the so-called Red Wall wave in 2019. Clearly, if your seat and others are to remain Conservative at the next election, the government needs to demonstrate to your voters things that have materially changed by May 2024. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what you think your constituents want, what their priorities are in seeing change brought about.
Yeah, I think levelling up for me is about really rebalancing the economy and also really understanding the barriers that are associated with that rebalancing, if you like. Of course, it's about opportunity and making sure that opportunity is available for all. It's about people and it's about places and understanding those barriers that are associated with the places that that people are situated within. And I think more than that, it's about culture as well. culture of a community and culture of a society. You know, we as politicians and all of us involved in this process can design the best legislation, the best strategy to put in place, but without that culture and getting the culture right, the strategy will never come out through to fruition. And there's a great saying that culture will eat strategy for breakfast any day, and I think that actually most definitely applies to the levelling up agenda, because it's all of those complex issues you have to understand when you bring out a framework or bring out policy. And I think you take my seat, Keighley, or others that we've won for Conservative for the first time up in the northeast, like Blythe, Redcar, Bishop Auckland, Sedgefield. You know, there's a lot of people that have essentially put their trust in the Conservative Party, many for the first time. And unless we actually make that change and deliver that levelling up agenda and making sure that we rebalance the economy in those areas, these people that voted Conservative are not going to see the benefits of that levelling up take place. So I think what are we doing? We've certainly seen like the Towns Fund initiative, which is something that Keighley is benefiting from, for example, which is a great mechanism for engaging the health sector, the education sector, and the business sector, pulling all of those sectors together to say, okay, you have an allocation of funds available. How can we best use public finances to crystallize inward investment from private organisations? And that's really what the Towns Fund initiative is all about, as part of the levelling up agenda that we're already seeing being initiated. But I also want to touch on some of the rural aspects, because I've got a
don't do that just yet, because
okay.
I'm actually going to come on to that as a main
okay.
subject a little bit later.
Yeah.
Justine, on this, personalise it to yourself, but also I'd quite like to talk a little bit about class here, because you and I think Robbie as well, come from, should we say, not an Oxford, Eton education. Actually, I don't know where you were educated, Robbie, or
Newcastle University.
But when I first got into politics, I really felt slightly inferior amongst the sort of George Osbornes, David Camerons, Boris Johnsons of this world. And it was only when I got to the ripe old age of 50 that completely disappeared. How easy is it for people from maybe more unconventional backgrounds to think that all of these areas that we inhabit routinely now are for them as well? I mean, obviously, it's not just about people getting into politics or the media, but it happens in business, I suspect, in law, I suspect it happens probably more than in some other areas.
Well, I think it's about changing the fact that it is unconventional to be a comprehensive school educated person who ends up being Secretary of State for Education. I think I was the first one to become Secretary of State for Education. And it's about changing the underlying issues that mean that's the case in the first place. What we were trying to do with the levelling up goals is make sure that for the first time, there's genuinely a common set of objectives and a common language that we can all use, whichever background we're from, and actually whichever part of society we're in, whether you're Simon running a law firm, whether you're Kiran at York University, or whether you're Robbie, an MP in Parliament, and almost bringing people together around some common language that then genuinely could be a framework for action and change on the ground. And, for me, levelling up was about the same chance to get on in life. I grew up not a million miles from the community that Robbie represents now, in Rotherham in South Yorkshire. And now I looked at people in my own family, my dad, who just never had the opportunities that he deserved, in a sense, to make the most of his potential. And I was really determined that I would make more of mine than he'd had chance to make of his. But, when I look at the journey that I took from going to my local primary school, then comprehensive, right the way to cabinet, I just think there's so much we can do to make that path easier for more people, whatever their aspirations and wherever they want to get to. And so that's what I set up the Social Mobility Pledge to do, really, because I felt that businesses can play a massive role in connecting more young people up to opportunity and spreading opportunity far wider into that much bigger talent pool that Britain's got. But in the end, you can do a lot of talking. I could do a million speeches on social mobility, but what I was really interested in was change on the ground and how you mobilize all these different people who really care about this to make a difference in their local communities and in the sense, whatever their sphere of influence was. So the social mobility pledge is doing that, but the levelling up goals are really saying, okay, these are the discrete things that we need to tackle in Britain if we're going to have a more fairer, levelled up country. And if you want to get involved, pick one of them, pick two, pick three, but pick the things that make a difference to you and then get involved with the work that's happening on those. And actually you can be part of something much, much bigger.
Let's, sorry, carry on, Treya.
Sorry. And I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that Justin made, because I think they're really important. And sometimes, you know, we bypass them. We bypass this idea of perception, you know, and our own narratives, because very often, once we reach those positions, people have all sorts of position, you know, sort of kind of perceptions on how we've got there. And like many of us around this table, I grew up in the East End of London before Canary Wharf was there, you know, and I really mean the back streets of East London, was told you'd never get to university. So there is something about changing people's perception about possibility. And we talk about ambition, but to have ambition, you have to raise aspirations and about possibilities. And Ian, you very eloquently talked about, you know, this notion of opportunity. But for many people, they have no idea, for instance, that in an academic institution like a university, there are more jobs than simply being an academic. There's a whole army of professional services possibilities, you know, as well as estates. So we have to work on, when we talk about the levelling up, it's not just kind of creating an environment that allow people to enter these. It's creating the ambition and the aspirations of what many people think is impossible. They don't know which networks to go to. They don't know who can open doors for them because they don't get exposure to that. And so therefore they don't even attempt it. So I think for me, there is something about key stages in life, you know, how we work with, you know, very young people right through, you know, to our communities and as we grow up, and work on the perception gap as much as we work on the levelling up gap.
I think that's a really good point about universities. It's not just academics that work there. I think particularly during COVID, people seem to think, oh, well, it's doctors and nurses in the health service. Well, no, there's a huge amounts of other people in education. People just talk about teachers. I think there are 450,000 teachers, but more than 1 million people work in schools. There are all sorts of things that people that don't get the sort of media headlines, I suppose, that maybe they merit. But Kieran, most importantly, I want to know, coming from East London, are you a fellow West Ham supporter?
I grew up right by the West Ham ground.
Did you?
Arsenal supporter.
Oh, such a letdown. Anyway, we'll move swiftly on. So obviously you're not going to get much time in the rest of this webinar.
Ian, can I just pick up that point?
Of course
you can. Just to extend it slightly in relation to law, approximately half our people are lawyers of one level of qualification or experience or another. But equally, just like universities, we employ many people who aren't lawyers and who never want to be a lawyer because they work in finance or they work in business development or they work in HR or facilities. So whether it's and I think universities can be seen as a business type, certainly in some respects, but business offers many opportunities, and the label that goes over the door isn't necessarily the only thing that people can aspire to do there. And I think we have a duty within business to make sure that actually we're not just talking about our lawyers. In my case, we're actually talking about all the other opportunities that exist there as well to people from wherever they start in life, so they can realize that actually law may not be what interests them, but actually they're really into finance, and actually there's a route in a law firm for someone that's really into finance, and so on. So I just thought, sorry, I cut across you slightly, but I think that point is worth making.
Let's look at this sort of urban-rural divide that we have in the country, because I think when we talk about levelling up, I suspect if you said that phrase to somebody not involved in the kind of debate that we're having, they might think that it was all about working class urban communities, enabling them to get more opportunities. But actually, as Robbie well knows, given his background, as I well know from my background, there is so much levelling up that needs to be done in rural communities and indeed coastal communities, I would say, where we all think of North Norfolk or Cornwall as an idyllic area. We see television programmes that show that they're wonderful places with wonderful scenery, and they are. But there are massive pockets of poverty. And of course, with poverty comes lack of opportunity. Robbie, just speak to that for a moment about the lack of opportunities and how your background in a rural community can affect where you go in life.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up in very rural Lincolnshire, and a lot of the villages, and this is common as you've just picked up in right across the country. A lot of the services that support some of those villages or hamlets aren't there anymore. The post office is gone. The village shop went years ago. The pubs recently closed, and then transport links are a challenge. The bus, you might be lucky enough to get one bus per day, and then coupled with that, the challenges with the digital connectivity. So that creates huge challenges. So if you're no matter what age, simply getting about within a rural community is challenging before you've even started doing anything about it, and that really does have an impact on the opportunities that are then available for you as you're growing up, or if you want a slight career change or whatnot. So and I think what we've got to emphasize through the levelling up agenda is it absolutely isn't just talking about forgotten about towns or small areas within our city environments. It's about levelling up the whole of the country, including the very remote areas, like parts of my constituency in West Yorkshire, which are very remote and struggling from all of those things that I've just mentioned and experienced from growing up in rural Lincolnshire.
I think sometimes, sorry, Robbie, I'll just throw one observation in around that, if I may. Sometimes things aren't always as they seem. I grew up in West Cornwall, a small place you may have heard of called Carbis Bay, which has hit the limelight quite recently. And there is a level of affluence there, but equally there is also a level of poverty in a variety of ways. And indeed, I grew up there and was educated there, but actually moved to get university education, which led to work outside Cornwall. So it also sees a migration of talent away from those places into the big cities, which adds to the problem. Who knows, maybe where we are in terms of not just technology, but working from home, and maybe one of the benefits coming out of COVID is actually we can see some of that swing back as people work in different ways. But my main point there, Ian, simply around first glance, sometimes can be very misleading, I'm sure, in terms of rural as well as coastal locations.
But I think it also underlines that in a sense you end up with the levelling up goals, but how they need to be addressed is different in different places. And for some places, I'm sat in London, there is a lot of opportunity. The challenge in this city is that a lot of it's closed to many young people growing up in the city. Of course, for you and for Robbie and Simon, you were growing up in places where there wasn't much opportunity on the doorstep. Even getting to opportunity was probably quite difficult. And so what we're trying to do through the levelling up goals is say that actually, if you really want to make a difference for everyone, not just some communities, then you have to have this broader agenda of these different goals to make sure that you're actually tackling improving lives on the ground for all communities, not just some of them. But different communities really have different challenges, and you need to be able to take that on board.
Just building. Sorry, Ian.
Sorry, Kate. Go ahead.
Build on the point that you've just raised, Justin. I think it's a really important one, because we often, use this notion of education as if it's the answer, for everything, and yet we know, and COVID-19 has shown us that not everybody has access to those learning opportunities. So when we talk about education and learning, we need to think sort of creatively and smartly. And I think what the levelling up goals do is provide a really practical response in terms of both raising ambition and aspirations, but building on the point that you've raised about opportunity for all, not just simply through education, but diverse learning opportunities, whether that's in the world of work, whether that's kind of in schools or colleges or universities, or whether that's kind of in our communities. And rural communities have extensive family businesses, and I've just done a major piece of work that shows how you can create learning and development opportunities through the work that they do. So I think the Levelling Up Goals provides a really interesting opportunity to think about how we develop enterprising and entrepreneurialism, through our community and throughout society.
I think that's a really interesting point, and also I wonder if once COVID is over, once it's over to any meaningful degree, I wonder if the fact that we've all got used to working at home is going to have an impact here. I'm already hearing of small businesses being set up in rural areas because they've suddenly found a market for people who are working at home. Some retail establishments are starting to get going again in villages. You talked, Robbie, about the village shop being closed and the butchers and all the rest of it. I wonder if there's an opportunity now for rural areas to really capitalise on the fact that our working patterns are really going to change over time. Robbie.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that that's already starting to happen, Ian. I think the last 12 months throughout the pandemic has triggered a change in the nature of working patterns. And I mean, I have actually seen that in my constituency, in other areas around West Yorkshire, where you're seeing very small micro local businesses now setting up to serve the people that are working from home. And I do think that there will be that continuous trend happening going forward. There are opportunities that come out of even, the challenging circumstances that we found ourselves in. And I think that where we come into play, particularly in my role, maybe in Westminster, is making sure that where we have got those micro businesses now setting up, that like the digital divide is sorted out, and those are other challenges that are associated with that are sorted out.
Let's move on to something else. I want to talk about the politics of this a bit, and then come on to the role of business and universities in the levelling up agenda, because I think we all know. I mean, I used to be in the dark distant past a political lobbyist, and I always knew that if I wanted to get something done for a client or a campaign, I needed to get Downing Street on board. I needed to get the Prime Minister on board. And that's easier said than done, depending on what you're asking for. Now, Boris talks a lot about levelling up, but Justine, does he actually get it? Is it something that means something personally to him, do you think?
I remember talking to him about levelling up during the leadership contest back in, I think it was July 2019, and he was really fired up about it. So I think he does understand it. I think the challenge we've all got is that we need to deliver on that, and people, need to sort of see some real action on the ground. So I think Boris does understand it. And to be fair, I mean, we had our discussion. My mission during that leadership contest was to make sure that whoever won it would put levelling up right at the heart of their agenda. I felt that equality of opportunity had never been enough at the top of Westminster's agenda. So I think he's done that. The key now is how we can work both inside and outside Parliament, and on a cross-party basis, and it's great that we've got a cross-party group on the levelling up goals, how we can work more in partnership to all pull in the same direction, genuinely make a difference on the ground in really different communities. And that's what we're seeking to do through the levelling up goals. And of course, I did the social mobility pledge because I think companies can be a real force for good on this. And if you put purpose at the heart of their agenda, and that purpose is delivering more opportunity into different communities that might not have had enough, then I think you really start to get an exciting chance to make a difference on the ground for potentially millions and millions of people.
Looking around the cabinet table, who do you think are the levelling up champions around that table? Because it's not just, I mean, there are various government departments, several of which you used to run. They need to buy into this as well, because if you've got any cabinet ministers who don't get it or don't really buy into it, it's not going to happen, is it? If they're in those crucial departments.
Well, two things. Every single government department needs to have a levelling up strategy. They all need to ask themselves where they fit in and how they, as departments, can deliver on these goals. Clearly, some of them are very aligned. For example, the sustainable community is absolutely part of DCLG. But perhaps the linchpin department, from my perspective, isn't necessarily education. That is crucial, but it's Treasury. And it's Treasury taking...
Wasn't it ever thus?
Treasury taking a different approach on and understanding that investment in people is going to be at the heart of how you deliver the levelling up agenda, alongside investment in infrastructure, as important as that is. And I wanted to do the levelling up goals because, in a sense, it's like a leaky bucket. If you're going to get change, you have to plug all of the holes, not just some of them. And I think that is down to Treasury having a fresh approach on investment that can really see it looking to the long term, and understanding that investing up front on people is one of the ways that you probably deliver being able to fund all the expense that we've had on COVID. You're not going to cope with that level of debt we've taken on unless everybody in Britain is able to make a contribution and can achieve their potential to do that.
In a way, you've made my heart sink there by saying that it is partly, if not wholly, reliant on Treasury cooperation, because over the years, and you must have seen this as a cabinet minister, they are literally the roadblock to reform, or at least can be.
I think that they inevitably want to look at day-to-day money and day-to-day spend, but my ask would be that they look to the longer term for investing in people in the same way that they've looked at the longer term for investing in infrastructure. If we can do that, then I think you really unlock an exciting time ahead where we can make a big difference. And if they can support companies that are part of delivering and spreading opportunity to a wider country, then I think that also is crucial. We've seen on net zero that it's going to be businesses that make the big difference. Government's role, in a sense, is to provide the enabling environment. I think it's the same with levelling up. They need to get behind the companies and the universities that are able to really make a change on the ground, and communities. And as Robbie's talked about, there are investments that already are in place to help do that, but it's about doing more of that at a scale and ambition that can really make a difference.
And Robbie, when you talk to your colleagues, particularly the ones who are elected at the same time as you, about the levelling up agenda, do you sense a degree of enthusiasm amongst them, or do their eyes sort of glaze over and think, oh, here he goes again?
I think all of my colleagues are absolutely charged with energy and enthusiasm to crack on with this agenda. Everyone is buzzing with ideas, and I was just listening to Justine there saying that the Treasury are probably one of the biggest departments that need to be on board, and absolutely right. But before entering the House of Commons, I had my own business, and we always looked at everything along the lines of the triple bottom line as opposed to the single bottom line. So looking at not only the economic benefits, but benefits for society and measuring that, and benefits for the environment and measuring that. And I think that is absolutely the way that government policy should go in to make some of these changes. So yeah, I think my colleagues are definitely enthusiastic about this. We wouldn't be in this role if we weren't.
Okay, well, let's look at the role of universities and business in this. And let's start with you, Simon. Law firms have a reputation as being a bit stuffy, but I suspect that over the last 10 or 20 years, that stuffiness has gradually been eked away. Do you think that your sector and the business sector more generally can really buy into this? And what are the advantages for them to do so? How can you incentivize people to really embrace this agenda?
Law firms probably don't see themselves as stuffy anymore, but I guess over a generation or two, it takes a while for some of that to work its way through the whole of the system, Ian. But I think businesses, really much more focused around what they're actually doing as opposed to where people come from, how they engage with their clients, how they find that talent, how they bring that talent through. All of that is good business. It drives the bottom line, and actually, as Robbie said a moment ago, it drives other things as well as the direct profit, short-term and long-term success of your business. So I think getting the combination of actually how you look at things is really, really important. One thing we haven't touched on, and I was going to mention, is recruitment, because I think recruitment has a key part to play, and actually how you go about your recruitment, because it'd be very easy perhaps just to continue to do things in the same way you've always done them, but guess what, that tends to produce the same outputs, the same types of recruitment. So I think you've got to lay the rules down as to how you want your recruitment to run, both internally and externally, whether you want to see certain universities or indeed you don't want to see certain universities. It's as much about choosing not to do things as about choosing what to do. how you want to see your recruitment list look like, the makeup of those recruitment lists, which isn't just about things like gender or race, as important as those are, but actually looking at the whole spectrum. You can control that by looking at your grade entry levels. Move your grade entry levels down. In fact, why not do away with them completely and just look at the individuals in front of you? Lots of work that comes before recruitment, as it were, actually people getting into a position where they can interview. And I think there's a whole load of work that can be done around that in terms of right from early years education through to later years education. You know, some of the work that we started to do, but for instance is paused at the moment because of COVID, but the idea around a pop-up office, so that actually people who don't have the influences of others can actually experience what an office looks like, what to wear, how to behave, what to do in a reception area when you walk in for that very first time. You know, do I pick a apple out of the bowl of fruit on the side or not? You know, it's really, really silly things, but unless you've been in that environment and experienced some of that, you just don't know what to do. So you're absolutely right, Ian. It's not one thing. There's a spectrum here that runs all the way along from, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years old, right through to actually not joining an organization, but actually once you've joined the organization, actually do you feel part of it? And that then begins to play the inclusivity piece. It's not just getting over one hurdle. People need then to feel that their career is supported all the way through, again, regardless of backgrounds, wherever you've started in life, so that we don't end up all looking the same, you know, as a bunch of partners around a table in a law firm, for instance. You know, that cannot be right. We're not as strong a business as we would be if actually we were all, you know, we're all the same. You know, that diversity, that tension and challenge, those new ideas make you a much stronger place. So it is a whole spectrum. I was focusing perhaps just on recruitment in terms of my earlier comments, but it is a much bigger picture than that.
Main lesson there: beware of plastic apples on law firm reception desks, I think.
Or wax, yeah.
Kieran, what role do universities, or what role can universities play in the levelling up agenda?
Universities have got an absolute critical role to play, and I want to pick up on 2 points. I want to pick up on the point that you raised about standards, and I want to really make this point strongly. The point you made, Simon, was a really good one, and this isn't about levelling down, you know, and universities taking students that, you know, then, you know, drop out. They drop out because the culture doesn't sustain them. You know, we create spaces, but then they are not part of, you know, there was a lovely example about how you kind of learn to belong as part of that. So universities are places, you know, if you look at their historic roots, how they were kind of set up, it's about creating education opportunities for all. It's about creating a culture and space where people flourish. And in some ways, you know, the levelling up goals are not new. You know, they build on what government has wanted for more years than I can remember, which is inclusive growth. You know, education wants inclusive growth, business wants inclusive growth, society wants inclusive growth. And so, you know, what we do in universities is work in partnership, you know, with policy and with government and with business and with public services and our communities, because then I think, you know, you begin to address the levelling down debate as opposed to the levelling up debate. And I want to pick up on a point that you raised, Justine, because I think that's absolutely vital. You know, what makes this different and distinctive? It's about the enacting, it's in the doing of it, you know, so whether as a university we're signed up, you know, to the levelling up goals, or whether it's government, this isn't saying what can we do to others? This is saying what can each of us do in our own business, in our own institutions. And if we all do something within those kinds of spaces and pick the goals that are most relevant to us, then we will make that kind of step change. It's just what Simon was saying. If you've always recruited from red brick universities, we're not saying don't come and recruit at red brick universities. Ask yourself, because that's the wrong question, ask yourselves, what are you losing in the process but by not exploring the richness and diversity of talent in all of those educational institutes? You know, and our recruitment practices aren't fit for purpose anymore. You know, we've been doing them for centuries. And just because we've been doing them for centuries, it doesn't mean they're the right thing for the 21st century. So I think, you know, what the Levelling Up Goals does is ask to hold a critical mirror up to our own practices, you know, and change our practices. And that's what, for me, is really exciting, you know, sort of about it. And that's why I genuinely believe it will make a difference. Because I use a strapline that says, making up the levelling up agenda, everybody's business. It's not just the role of education or government or business. It's the connectivity and the collectivism that will bring about that change.
I think that's really interesting, because I was about to ask, in fact, I'm going to ask the same question, but you've kind of answered it there in a sense. Is this agenda just about more money, particularly for the North? I mean, inevitably, anything you want to do is going to cost money. It was interesting at the weekend in the papers, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor seem to be reconciled to the fact that big spending is going to have to continue for quite some time after we recover from COVID. But it's not just about spending money in the north of England. It goes much more widely than that, doesn't it, Justine?
Well, I think also it's about investing rather than just throwing money at a problem. And one of the things that's really struck me through the nearly 3 years of working on the Social Mobility Pledge is how many solutions, Ian, are out there on the ground. And you can point to work that businesses like Shoesmiths, Direct Line, Adecco recruitment company that's also part of this, that they are already doing that work and that other companies can look at and learn from. The solutions are already out there. In education, we have a huge amount of information about what works on the ground, how to tailor it to different communities. I think we know how to do levelling up. The challenge is whether we're prepared to be smart, break this problem down, which is what the levelling up goals do, and then have a more sustained approach that's cross-party, so we don't get the chopping and changing, to actually work long enough on these issues, consistently enough, to really make a difference in people's lives. But we can do it. But my argument would be, if this is done well, it is not a cost, it's about an investment, and it's about rebalancing, as Robbie said, the economy, so that actually everybody is actually able to generate a contribution, rather than at the moment, we spend more money sending some young people to prison than we do if we would to send them to Eton, which is absolutely mad. So it's about having a smarter set of public finances through having a country where genuinely people can make a contribution and it doesn't matter what their background is, which overridingly at the moment, it too often does seem to matter.
We hear a lot about the word reset at the moment, and COVID, I suppose, offers an opportunity to press the reset button. What does that actually mean, though, in practice, apart from identifying areas that do need much more investment? Because in the end, and this is not all about the Conservative Party, but if the Conservative Party wants to get the kind of majority that they got last time, they're going to have to hold on to all of these so-called red wall seats. And as I said at the beginning, voters there are going to want to see a material difference in the way that their lives are being affected. But it goes for other areas as well. Is this almost an impossible task, Robbie, or do you think that there is enough creative thinking within government to come up with the kind of policies that will have an impact by 2024?
I don't think anyone underestimates the challenge that's associated with levelling up. And that was before the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic, and obviously the last 12, 13, 14 months has also exacerbated the challenge. I think what we are starting to see now from government and from different tiers of government is more fresh ideas coming forward. And as Justine has said, actually, if you put that call out to help for many businesses, a lot of the solutions are actually there, and actually people are cracking on with doing them already. What we need to ensure from a policy point of view is that we don't overcomplicate the problem too much, because businesses that are that are able to make the change, they like to be nimble and adapt. And I'll give you an example of what's happening in Keighley, in my constituency, where we have Keighley College, further education college, working very closely with the businesses within Keighley that has strong manufacturing, engineering and tech-based backgrounds, that are calling out and saying to me and to others across the community, actually, we need our skill set to be developed within that manufacturing, engineering and tech sectors. And yet now Keighley College is designing courses that are going to be made available for them further down the line, in 4, 5, 6 years time. So it's It's actually looking at things a bit smarter and designing things for the market that's anticipated to be down the line, so that those opportunities can be available on the ground to the youngsters and those that are wanting to upskill or reskill.
We've been talking about this for decades. I mean, in terms of vocational education, I remember John Major making big speeches about vocational education, the need to expand apprenticeships. But not a lot of that has really been achieved over the past 2 or 3 decades. We still treat vocational education as very much a sort of second-class education, whereas if we look at what happens in Germany, it's entirely the opposite. Kieran, how can we get out of this mindset and actually encourage 16, 18-year-olds to think that, well, it's not necessarily all about going to university. You haven't failed if you don't go to university, because to me, that is probably the biggest key to levelling up, to give youngsters of that kind of age a hope that there is something out there for them, even if it isn't a university course.
Yeah, that's a superb question. I think we have to work really closely, with our schools, our colleges and our universities, and we have to work much more tightly together in order to be able to give, young people a clear and a fair idea of kind of what's possible. And that's not at the exclusion of business as well. It's, we're back to one, changing perception, B, learning to work, much more closely together and not competitively. And of course, we are competitors, and that's the nature of kinds of business. But if we want to do the right thing by young people, and as you said, Germany's a great example. They have an incredibly powerful apprenticeship scheme, but it works because that's embedded in the learning process kinds of very on. But it's not just about our young people, it's about parents. Where do young people learn as to what they do want to do and where those different competing pressures are? So I think we have to work, to use a wonderful word that Justine often uses, about working holistically. There is no point.
Oh, I hate that word. I hate that word because nobody really knows what it means.
It means, for me, in really simple terms, working, more collegiately and more collectively, and not just working on where we think the root cause of the problem lies, but looking in other kinds of places, because you can do all the great work that we want to do with young people. That isn't necessarily the complete answer. You also have to work with their peers, and you have to work with their parents, because if you expose parents to what's kind of possible, then they might help, make sure that the kinds of career paths that we choose are the right ones, but they're not the only ones. I.e., you make a decision when you're 15 or 16, it doesn't mean that's the only path you will be able to travel on. And education and universities are much more about lifelong learning. You start the process, but it doesn't mean that you just come in, get your degree, and then you're gone. And actually, I think COVID-19 has been really powerful as a positive in showing us kind of what's possible. And you've seen that. We've seen that in action, in really short space of times, whether it's young people or people that have been made redundant, setting up their own businesses on what I call the kitchen table, with those kinds of new ideas and innovation, or whether it's about kinds of learning new skills. So I think, people have had a little bit of exposure to the art of the possible.
I want to start wrapping things up now. And one of the things that I think everybody who's taken part in this discussion, and hopefully everyone who's watching it, I think we've all been enthused by a sense of optimism and positivity from what everyone's been saying here. And we look at Boris Johnson, who I don't think it's controversial to say has many political weaknesses, but one of his great strengths, I think, is this permanent sense of optimism. Now, that's been quite a difficult thing over the COVID-19 crisis. But as we come out of it, I wonder whether that sense of optimism leading the country to some sort of sunny uplands where everybody has this sense of opportunity is actually going to be one of the core political themes of the next couple of years. So let's finish off by going to each of you and asking, how can we measure whether the levelling up agenda has actually meant anything, say within 3 years? Are we just looking at new buildings? It's a local communities say, oh, well, we've got this school over the last 3 years, so that means that we have levelled up, or it goes much wider than that, I think. Simon, let's start with you.
Yeah, from a business perspective, a Shoesmith's perspective, one of the things that we're going to start to do that we haven't done is actually measure some of the changes within our Shoesmiths population. So actually have some metrics along where people have come from, what background, whether that's gender, race, other backgrounds. So we can actually see whether we, in terms of our approach, is actually changing, and indeed whether that is beginning to move up the sort of spectrum, the qualification or the age gradient as you move through the business, so that we can see tipping points, so that we can see, come right to the top of the business, that we have the right balances between people from all sorts of backgrounds across our business. That's the bit we can control. I guess the outside bit is probably more difficult for us to measure, other than what we do. So we come back to what we've done in terms of the pledge, the social mobility pledge, and our role in that in terms of our individual plans in our locations, beginning to look at what we do in each of those locations and begin to sort of not only record, but begin to measure again what we think we can get out of them. So I think measurement has to be key in all of this. If I would say this coming from business perhaps, but if you haven't got any data, you don't know what direction you're heading in. You don't know where you started, you don't know where you're ending up, and you don't know what your journey is along the way. So I do think we need to do some work around data in all of this so that we can begin to track it. And again, it comes back to the subject of today. Without the goals, again, it's such a broad subject. So the goals, I think, begin to break it up, narrow it down, and I think put some data around that as we go forward, we can begin to see the change.
And we are going to, of course, be discussing each of these 14 goals over the coming weeks. Robbie, let's come to you next.
Yeah, I think, of course, it's about making sure that we're getting the investment into all parts of the country. But it's not just about new shiny projects or new big infrastructure projects. It's about how people feel on the ground and raising aspiration. How does one of my constituents or one of any resident living across the country feel their life has changed for the better over the next 3 or 4 year period? And it's also looking at the effectiveness of public money being spent. Because the last thing that I want to see is, public funds being invested into projects that don't actually drive any real change or don't drive private investment coupled alongside that to get that longevity that's attached to it. So in short, I think it's making sure that over the next 3-4 years and beyond, that we are raising aspirations and making people's lives feel a little bit better over that period of time.
Caroline, let's come to you.
I think for me, there would be three key measures, as a university, at York. One is that we diversify our recruitment pipeline, and that's both for staff and students. 2 is that we change the perceptions of people wanting to come live and work at York. And 3, it's making sure that we have an education proposition that is inspiring and raises those aspirations and ambition and fit for kind of creating, new enterprise and, kind of business leaders of the future who are diverse.
Justine, I wanted to finish with you as our leader. Can I say that? Well, how do you think we should measure success in this agenda?
Well, the levelling up goals should all end up with quite clear targets that we can see whether we're moving forwards or backwards. But fundamentally, to sum it all up, it's going to be, are we doing a better job of developing this nation's talent through the education system? Are we doing a better job of giving young people the advice and guidance they need to make smart choices about what they want to do with that talent? And is the world of opportunity, in terms of enough opportunities and then fair opportunity, is that in itself moving in the right direction too? So we want to have more opportunities, but we also want the opportunity created in our country to become fairer. So it's really on those 3 different levels. And of course, the levelling up goals break all of that down so that we finally start to have an ability to track our progress against them, but in a much more granular way. And I think communities just want to know things are moving in the right direction and to be able to see that for themselves in their day-to-day lives.
Well, thank you very much for that. Thanks to you all, Robbie Moore, Kieran Trehan, Simon Boss and Justine Greening. Next time, we're going to be discussing the digital divide, which I think is an incredibly important topic when we're talking about a levelling up agenda. That's going to be hosted by the University of Staffordshire next week. Join us then. Thank you very much and goodbye.